Picture this. You're Steve Jobs. You've just been told you have pancreatic cancer and you might die in a few months. What do? How does that change your outlook on life, on success, on failure, on all of it? In this video, we're going to look at how this brush with death shaped one of the most influential speeches of our time. We'll see how Jobs turned his biggest failures into fuel for success, and how he used his darkest moments to inspire millions. Trust me, by the end of this, you'll be looking at your own life in a whole different way, because this speech really changed mine, so I wanted to share it with you guys as well. What if I told you that dropping out of college was the best decision that Steve Jobs ever made? This is where Steve Jobs' journey takes really an unexpected turn. Picture an 18-year-old Jobs freshly enrolled at Reed College, a prestigious liberal arts school in Portland, Oregon. His working-class parents have scraped together every penny they have to send him there. It's supposed to be his ticket to success, but 6 months in, Jobs is miserable. He can't seem to find any value in what he's learning. He's burning through his parents' life savings, and for what? A piece of paper that says he's qualified for something? The more he thinks about it, the less it makes sense. So Jobs does something that takes serious guts. He drops out of Reed College after just one semester, walking away from what everybody tells him is his golden opportunity. It's a decision fraught with fear and uncertainty, going against the pressure from his parents, friends, and society in general. But Jobs had this idea that he could learn more by following his curiosity than by following a curriculum. So he starts dropping in on classes that actually interest him. No pressure, no grades, just pure learning for the sake of learning. He's getting all the knowledge without any of the student debt. One of these random classes he decides to sit in on? Calligraphy, of all things. It seems completely useless at the time. I mean, what's a guy interested in computers and technology going to do with the art of beautiful handwriting? Well, as it turns out, quite a lot, but we'll get to that in a bit, so don't worry. By walking away from the safe, traditional path, Jobs opened doors he never even knew existed. He didn't know it at the time, but this decision to drop out was laying the groundwork for some of the most revolutionary innovations in tech history. At this point, Jobs is just a college dropout with a weird interest in calligraphy. He's not exactly screaming future tech muggle like he is now and like what we know him for. And I bet a lot of people looked at him and thought, that poor kid, he's just throwing his life away. But little did they know, this seemingly random decision was about to change everything. That calligraphy class, the one that seemed so useless, it was about to play a crucial role in making personal computers, well, personal, for lack of a better word. Steve Jobs' interest in calligraphy was about to change the way that we interact with machines forever. It sounds ridiculous, but it's true. In the early 1980s, the tech world focused solely on function. Computers were big, clunky machines that spat out monospaced text. But Jobs had a different vision. He believed computers should be beautiful, not just functional. And that calligraphy course that he took after dropping out, it wasn't so useless after all. Jobs applied this knowledge to the first Macintosh, sketching out gorgeous fonts while everyone around him questioned his priorities. Steve, who cares about pretty letters when we're trying to revolutionize computing, is what people would say, I'd imagine. Jobs understood something fundamental about human nature. We're drawn to beautiful things. He believed people would want their computers to look as good as they function, so he pushed for the Mac to have multiple typefaces and proportionately spaced fonts. Imagine trying to explain to engineers why the spacing between letters matters. But Jobs stuck to his guns, creating fonts for a device that in many ways didn't even exist yet. And when the Macintosh hit the market, people were amazed by its appearance. Suddenly, computers weren't just for tech geeks or number crunchers. They appealed to the artists, designers, and everyday people who wanted their documents to look professional and polished. This focus on typography revolutionized the entire PC industry. Windows and other competitors scrambled to catch up, trying to replicate Apple's success, and Jobs had taken something as old school as calligraphy and used it to push computing into the future. But it wasn't just about aesthetics. This typography revolution made computers feel personal. For the first time, people could express themselves through their machines. They could choose fonts that matched their personality, mood, or the tone of their message. Jobs had given these cold, calculating devices a human touch. This exemplifies Jobs' ability to transform seemingly useless knowledge into innovative breakthroughs. It makes you wonder what other random interests or hobbies might be shaping the future of tech right now. Perhaps some kid's obsession with origami will lead to the next breakthrough in smartphone design. Really, the possibilities are endless. Jobs had a talent for turning the unexpected into innovation, but even he couldn't have predicted how his next hobby would shape his future. How does getting fired become the best thing that ever happened to you? Let's rewind to 1985 and find out a little bit. Picture this. Apple, the company Jobs started in his garage with Steve Wozniak, has grown into a $2 billion behemoth with over 4,000 employees. It's the kind of success story most entrepreneurs can only dream of, but here's the kicker. Jobs is about to get kicked out of his own company. So how did we get here? Well, it all started when Steve Jobs decided to bring in some outside help. He hires John Sculley to be Apple's CEO. Jobs famously asks Sculley, "Do you want to sell sugar water for the rest of your life, or do you want to come work with me and change the world?" Pretty smooth, right? I mean, I think so, personally. But here's the thing. Jobs might have been too smooth for his own good. See, Sculley and Jobs, they're like oil and water. Their visions for Apple's future they don't mix. Jobs wants to keep pushing the boundaries and taking risks, but Sculley, he's all about steady growth and playing it safe. And when two big egos clash like that, something's gotta give. The tension builds until it finally comes to a head in 1985. The board of directors sides with Sculley in this corporate showdown, and just like that, Steve Jobs, the guy who co-founded Apple, who turned it into a tech powerhouse, is out. Jobs later said that he felt like he'd let the previous generation of entrepreneurs down. It's not just a career setback, it's a full-blown identity crisis. I mean, who could blame him? And for a while, he even considered leaving Silicon Valley altogether and escaping somewhere else. But here's where it gets interesting. Jobs doesn't give up. Instead, he starts seeing this massive failure in a totally different light. He later reflected, saying, "I didn't see it then, but it turned out that getting fired from Apple was the best thing that could have ever happened to me." Jobs put it this way: the heaviness of being successful was replaced by the lightness of being a beginner again, less sure about everything. It freed him up to enter one of the most creative periods of his life. It's like Jobs got a do-over. All the pressure, all the expectations that came with being Steve Jobs, Apple CEO, were gone. Suddenly, he could experiment, take risks, follow his curiosity wherever it led him. And let me tell you, it led to some pretty interesting places. So Jobs is free to follow his curiosity, but what if I told you that curiosity would lead him to create a computer so advanced it was practically from the future, and then almost go broke because of talking toys? Sounds crazy, right? Well, Jobs' wilderness years were about to get wild. After getting booted from Apple, Jobs doesn't waste any time. He starts two new ventures, Next Computer and Pixar. Now you might be thinking, wait, Pixar? Like the animation studio? Yeah, that Pixar. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's start with Next first. Jobs invests heavily in creating this sleek black cube of a computer. And let me tell you, this thing was a beast. It had a Motorola processor that outperformed other computers on the market, but that's not even the coolest part. Next has this operating system called Next Step that was incredibly advanced. We're talking about a machine that had a built-in CD-ROM drive when most people were still using floppy disks. Jobs was thinking multimedia before it was mainstream. But here's the problem. Next was just too ahead of its time. It was expensive, it was niche, and most people just didn't get it. Jobs was rapidly depleting his resources onto this venture, and meanwhile, over at Pixar, things weren't looking much better. Jobs had bought this little division from Lucasfilm for $10 million, and at first, this $10 million investment's sole focus was on trying to sell high-end graphics computers, but no one was buying. Jobs was losing money on both fronts. But here's where it gets interesting. Pixar starts experimenting with computer animation. They make short films, mostly to showcase their technology, and people start to take notice. This hardware company is transforming essentially into an animation studio. And then you fast forward to 1995 and Pixar releases Toy Story. Just the first ever feature-length film made entirely with computer-generated imagery. This movie is a massive hit. As you know, I'm sure you've seen it. Critics love it. People love it. I love it. And it makes over $370 million worldwide. Overnight, Pixar goes from a financial burden to a major success. And next? Well, it turns out that super advanced operating system catches someone's eye. And can you guess who? Apple. They buy Next for $429 million and get Jobs back in the process. Talk about a plot twist. So here's Jobs, the guy who got kicked out of Apple, coming back as the conquering hero. He's got a hit movie studio in his back pocket and the very technology Apple needed to survive. It's like he was playing a long game while everyone else was focused on the short term. And just when it seemed like Jobs had it all figured out, life threw him a curveball that even his genius couldn't predict. Imagine hearing words that could shatter your entire world in an instant. How would you react if a doctor looked at you in the eye and said, "You have 6 months to live"? That's exactly what happened to Steve Jobs in 2003. He's back at Apple, riding the high on the success of Pixar and Next, thinking he's invincible. Then a routine check turns his whole world upside down. Doctors tell him he has pancreatic cancer, and not just any cancer, but a rare form that's particularly aggressive. Now, put yourself in Jobs' shoes for a second. You're at the top of your game, you've overcome failure, you're changing the world with your innovations, and suddenly you're faced with your own mortality. It's like the ultimate system crash, but this time, there's no reboot button. The doctors don't need to sugarcoat it. They tell Jobs to get his affairs in order. And that's doctors speak for start planning your funeral. One day you're thinking about the next big tech breakthrough, and the next, you're contemplating your own obituary. Jobs, being Jobs, doesn't take this lying down. He starts researching like crazy, looking for alternatives, second opinions, and anything that may give him a fighting chance. And in true Jobs fashion, he finds a way to think different. He opts for a less conventional treatment, much to the concern of his doctors and loved ones. This brush with death fundamentally changes Jobs. He starts looking at his work, his life, his legacy in a whole new light. It's like he's seeing everything through this new lens of mortality. All these petty office politics and corporate squabbles don't seem so important anymore. They fade away. So Jobs starts focusing on what really matters. He doubles down on innovation at Apple, pushing for products that will make a real difference in people's lives. It's like he's racing against time, trying to cram a lifetime of ideas into whatever time he thinks he has left. And against all odds, Jobs beats the initial prognosis. He doesn't just survive 6 months. He goes on to lead Apple through some of the most innovative years. The iPhone, the iPad, these world-changing devices are all born in this post-diagnosis era. But Jobs doesn't just bounce back to his old self. This experience leaves an indelible mark on him. He carries this new perspective with him, this acute awareness of life's fragility. It's like he's operating on a different frequency now, one where every moment counts, where every decision is weighted against the ultimate deadline. Jobs' brush with death changed him, but how would he translate that into words? When Stanford University invited to give their commencement speech, Jobs faced a unique challenge. How could a college dropout connect with graduates and share his life lessons in a way that would actually stick? You'd think a guy who would revolutionize personal computing would be a pro at public speaking, right? No, not so fast. Jobs was known for his product launches, sure, but a commencement speech? That's a whole different ballgame. He's got to connect with these bright-eyed graduates who've just spent 4 years hitting the books, or maybe just partying, honestly, who knows. But Jobs, being Jobs, doesn't give them some generic, quote-unquote, follow your dreams spiel. He decides to get personal. Really, really personal. He breaks down his life into 3 simple stories, which is how he prefaces it. He talks about dropping out of college, which you might think would be awkward given the audience, but Jobs flips the script, explaining how it allowed him to drop in on classes that he actually cared about, like that calligraphy class. Telling these kids, hey, your education doesn't stop when you get that diploma. Stay curious. Then he touches on getting fired from Apple. Standing in front of thousands and talking about your biggest public failure? Yeah, that's pretty gutsy. But Jobs frames it as a turning point that freed him to be creative again, leading to Next and Pixar. It's a lesson in resilience and finding opportunity in setbacks. But it's the third story that really hits home. Jobs talks about his cancer diagnosis. He gets raw about facing death. He tells these graduates, remembering that you are going to die is the best way I know to avoid the trap of overthinking you have something to lose. It's heavy stuff, but it's also incredibly powerful. He's not just giving advice, he's sharing hard-won wisdom. Throughout the speech, Jobs keeps coming back to these big themes: death, love, and trust. He's not just talking about career success, he's talking about how to live a meaningful life. It's like he's distilled everything he's learned into this 15-minute speech. And you know what's crazy? He manages to do all of this without sounding preachy or cliched. He's just sharing his experiences, warts and all. It's vulnerable, it's honest, and it's incredibly impactful. So what's the big takeaway? What's the final piece of wisdom Jobs leaves these graduates with? He tells them, stay hungry, stay foolish. It's a phrase he borrowed from an old catalog, but in Steve Jobs' mouth, it becomes something more. It's a call to never stop learning, never stop taking risks, never settle for the status quo. Steve Jobs' life teaches us that turning setbacks into comebacks is the real success story. He proved that failure often marks the beginning of something extraordinary, not the end. Life will inevitably throw curveballs at you, but what if you embraced that uncertainty? What if you trusted your instincts and followed your curiosity even when it leads you off the well-worn path? Even when it seems illogical to others? Jobs encouraged us to make a dent in the universe. It might sound ambitious, but we all possess that potential. It's not about being a tech genius or a visionary. It's about staying hungry for new experiences and believing in your unconventional ideas. So I pose one question to you. How will you leave your mark in the world? Be sure to leave your thoughts down in the comments. And with all that out of the way, thank you again so much for watching this video. And in this one, I tell you, stay hungry, stay foolish.